Okie dokie. Everybody hear me all right? Katie, you can hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent. What do we prefer? Looking at that for the next hour, or do you want to look at me? Just obviously we've had to create some form of structure for this, so we've sort of split it into these three bits. As Katie says, don't worry too much about trying to make sure that your question fits neatly. Yeah, if it's a planning related question, then that to me is fitting within item 1 here. Sort of health and safety on site related questions would fit within item 3, but yeah, we'll work it out, I hope. So I hope the sessions thus far have been useful. Just to sort of update as to where we're at on site, I figured might be helpful. You can things continue to open back up. So all of our sites now, we've got 26 on the go at the moment. All of those sites are live, no matter which part of the country they're in. But they're not as productive as they used to be. So the London sites, particularly, trying to get people to those sites by public transport is an issue. And where we suspect that is going to head is to at the moment it's a series of discussions that we're trying to preempt and head off about if a site is not running as efficiently as it was anticipated, then obviously the end date is likely to get extended. So who's paying for that inefficiency? And whilst the situation is new, people tend to be reasonable, so we're trying to sit everybody down and have those sorts of discussions rather than leave it to the end of the job and then have that discussion at that time, because you're sitting in a project that is then late, where money might be an issue, is going to be difficult to come to an amicable solution. And at the moment, we think that everybody's trying to do their best, or we're sort of assuming that everybody's trying to do their best, and we're here as a middle person trying to then adjudicate and check that indeed we think that everybody is indeed trying to do their best. So London site's particularly tricky. Other things, you do need to be aware that some of the site setup is a little bit more complicated. So the best practice is to have hot water available very close to the entrance on site so that people can wash their hands, or hand wash facilities at least very close to the entry to site, so that people can wash their hands as they come onto site and as they leave site. And then obviously the social distancing is an issue. There are standard industry procedures. So the Chartered Institute of Building, RICS, various other people have adapted government guidelines for how to behave on site. Make sure it's good practice to make sure that everybody has got those guidelines and that they understand them. If you've got a main contractor, they're responsible for running the site, so you don't have to force those guidelines on them, but making sure that they've got them and understood them is a good idea. And then your role as a client is worth bearing in mind. So we are getting some reports. It's quite reasonable, particularly if you're vulnerable, for you not to want to come onto site to meet the contractor as you might have done once upon a time, and to be asking the contractor, how are we going to meet? What is a Zoom meeting? What is a remote meeting going to look like? How's that going to function? How's that going to work? But if you are happy to come onto site, then do remember that contractor may well expect you, ought to expect you, to maintain some social distance. So we've got 1 or 2 very friendly clients who want to come and have a very close look at what's going on, and the subcontractors on particular sites are not appreciative particularly at this moment in time, of that close attention. So, again, be respectful to the guys who are doing the work, and make sure that you're abiding by the rules that you're then also expecting them to abide by. That's probably enough of an intro. I think we had a few questions that we had managed to salvage from the previous few sessions, so I think we've got some already in, while Katie's working on hopefully the questions that are flowing in from now. I see one in the chat: the planning and scheduling. Yeah, that to me is a life on site issue. So if it's down to if your question's relating to how are we organising operations on site, then chuck it in there. If it's a wider one about the timings of design related items, then probably putting it into the design related section would be great. If you're not sure, put 1, 2, and 3 on it. We'll get to it. No, I didn't say that. Katie, you're firing questions at me, and I'm reacting to them. Is that how we're going?
That's correct. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
just folks, this is not a competition. You're not here to try and catch me out. If we can't answer a question, and I'm sure there will be some that I'm going to struggle with, we'll note that down and get back to you. Okay. So go easy on me. Thank you. Okay.
Fantastic. So yeah, like we've said, we did manage to save the ones that you sent in by email, and we've been through them and we've color-coded them into design, procurement, life on site. So I think a good place to start is design. So I'm going to read out the first one to you, Charlie, and this one's from Natalie. And Natalie has asked first, are there any suggestions on how I can check quality of an architect's previous building regs drawings as part of the selection process? I would like to feel comfortable that they are competent in this area to try and avoid interpretation by the builder, which later leads to budget issues.
Good question. So simple answer is no. So obviously planning drawings are available to have a look at on the planning website, whereas the building regs drawings are not available for public view. So it's then a question of asking the right questions for references. So I think at some point we'll have said, look, you need to get references on your architects as well as your builder. Make sure, I think, that the architect is used to doing stuff that looks like your project. Yeah, so if you're wanting a super minimalist house, and the architect is used to designing mock Tudor, then I'd question whether that's going to be a good fit. Yeah, if you're on a refurb type project, then again, getting an architect that's used to refurb. And the eco side of things is probably particularly important to make sure that the performance side, whether you're wanting a passive house, you're getting somebody who's used to those sorts of things. And part of the questioning of the references that the architect is giving you is, well, I would go and actually talk to the clients and then ask the clients about the cost increases that they suffered or incurred during the life of the project. Did they feel that those designs were fully worked up in order to limit the amount of variations, and that the variations, if there were any, were then client induced or ground conditions induced rather than discrepancy on the drawings? And I think it's a very valid question to ask. It's a good, sensible question to be asking. The level of that detail in building regs and how it might affect the progress on site. Yeah, absolutely. You're thinking along the right lines there. I think the best place to get that from, obviously, the architect. You will tell you they're wonderful. So trying to get some information from previous clients as to what they felt about that. You might actually get that information from previous builder as well, because the builders probably won't want a variation process is a hassle. So if they can avoid that as well, you may find that they are actually giving an opinion on the reliability of those drawings as well. Okay.
Okay, the next one's from Sean and Anthony. And they say, my question is concerning planning permission. If you bought a plot with full planning permission for something you don't necessarily want to build, how easy is it to amend this? If it involves resubmitting a full planning application, does this automatically void the original planning permission?
Okay, so sort of two parts to that. How easy is it to get a new planning? So if you want to do something different to what's on the plans, you will need to get new planning. Okay, I can't really comment on how easy that's going to be, because that's going to be dependent on how radical your new scheme is. So you know, if you're downsizing what's there, you would think that it would be relatively sensible. But if you're increasing the footprint of what's there and you're going for a more radical design, well, you can imagine what the neighbours might think of that. So you've got to have pay some attention to what you've already got planning permission for. And the other thing, obviously, that might have a bearing on that is where the house is situated. So, you know, if you're in an area of outstanding natural beauty, a site of science, you know, there might be other stakeholders might have more of a say. So you can't automatically assume that just because you've got planning for house A, that actually going back for house B is going to be successful. All right. It's a reasonable assumption, but I wouldn't want you to think it's a guarantee. Now, if you get planning for house B, it does not void the planning for house A. Yeah. So house A's planning application is still valid, and you could fall back to that at some time. However, you must remember that every successful planning has a time element to it. So you will need to have started house A within 3 years of it being awarded to you. Yeah. You don't need to have completed it, but you will need to have started it. So that, what is a start? The most reliable way there is getting building control out to come and do an inspection. All right. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to have done full building regs design on that house to have got your start. If you remember, we spoke about a building notice procedure. So you could notify building control, dig a section of foundations, come and have get them to come and have a look at that, complete a section of foundations, and that would be enough to bank your planning for house A whilst you enter into negotiations on house B, C, D, whatever. The other thing that might be allied to this question, you don't actually have to own the site to get planning. Yeah, so you could submit planning for your next door neighbour's house. All right. Now, obviously, if you improve the value of their plot, that value is going to them. It's not coming to you yet. But you don't actually have to own a site to submit a design for planning. Okay, hope that helps. Next.
So the next one's from Philippe, and he said, can we use building notice applications for a self-build, or do we need full detailed planning?
Right, so slightly confused by this one, because the first part of that question is talking about a building notice, which is relating to building regulations approval, and then the second bit is talking about full planning. So let's just go back a bit. So the planning and the building regs are separate. Okay. Every house is going to need full planning. Okay, so planning comes in two colors. One is an outline planning permission and the other is detailed. Every house has to have detailed planning, so you will need full planning. On the building reg side of things, you do not have to have all of the building regs signed off in advance before you start work on site. So a building notice process allows you to say to building control, we haven't got all the details of the engineering side of how the house is going to stand up here fixed yet. We're going to work out some of these details with you during the life of the project. And that's what going down a building notice route would mean. But if you submit the building notice for a project that hasn't got planning, you're in breach of planning, and you might be in trouble. On the building notice side of things, just before anybody gets carried away on that, building notice is useful and valuable, but for a domestic property, I get anxious for clients that are thinking of using a building notice, because it means that your design is not fully worked up. And if your design is not fully worked up, I don't see how a builder can have given you a price for building it. Yeah, which then suggests to me that you're starting on something that you haven't got a firm price for, that you don't know what the end cost is going to be. Yeah, and that makes me nervous for a domestic client. Okay, if you're aware of those risks, cognizant of those risks, and happy to proceed on that basis, well, absolutely fine. Yeah, but that's the risk that I think you need to bear in mind.
Thank you. Okay, so we're about halfway through section 1. We've had lots of questions come through on the question and answer function, so I'm moving on to this now. So Charlie, I'm going to read out some of the questions that have been submitted here live. Let's do more of a quick fire round, just because I'm keen to get through quite a few of these. We've had some really good questions come through. So firstly, Jeanette has said, I've been told to contact the fire brigade to get my property cleared as safe or install a mist system. I can't get anyone to contact me. Who or what department do I need to go to?
Okay, so I'm intrigued as to who's told you to contact the fire brigade. Getting your building to conform to fire regs, one of the sections in building regs is fire related. So we've got to get the scheme compliant with building regs, which includes complying with fire. Now, building control, whoever's doing your building regs design ought to be able to do that, possibly in discussion with building control. Now, it might be that there is something particular about your project that actually building control want to refer to the fire brigade. Or for a commercial property, there is often a fire brigade sign off to make sure that the fire department can access site correctly. But on a domestic property, that's pretty unusual. So the decision about whether to have a mist system, and this is a sort of sprinkler light system for those who are not aware, and it might take away the need to have the fire door regime that you'd otherwise have to have. So that debate about whether a mist system is going to be appropriate or not ought to be able, I'd have thought, to be handled between your designer and building control. And I would question them as to why that needs to then get referred up to the fire brigade. If you are having to go up to fire brigade, you're going to want to find out where your local office is and email and call them, I would guess, and they'll have somebody in an office situation as opposed to operational situation that you'll then want to get hold of their name. That will be used to consulting on particularly commercial projects. Yeah, that will be the person whose name to try to get hold of.
Okay.
Sorry, a bit vague on that.
No, thank you. So this one's from David, and he said, is SIL based on building area or living area?
SIL is based on internal dimensions, and it's the increase in internal dimensions. So if you've got an existing dwelling, it's the increase in size of that dwelling. Okay, if you're taking down a lean-to shed, as it were, you'll get a bit of a credit to then set against the extension. So there is some maths to be done here as to how much that area might be reduced before it then gets increased.
Okay, Pippa has asked, does SIL apply in Scotland?
Next. It doesn't. It doesn't actually necessarily apply. It varies from council to council in England as well. So the CIL charges will vary depending on the local council. So for some it is still relatively insignificant, and for some it's astronomical. So you know, your view of CIL will vary depending on absolutely where you are in the country. That includes actually being where you are within England as well as wider country.
Okay, so the next one's from Andy, and he has said, do you mostly use an architect for design, or have you used architectural technologists, and would this significantly reduce the design costs?
So architectural technicians, absolutely fine way to get a design done for your project. No problem with working with them at all. How to choose? What does surprise me quite often is that we find clients will anticipate going and speaking to 4 builders, 5 builders, but they'll only speak to one architect or one architectural technician. Yeah, to me, that architectural relationship is very important. Why not go and speak to more than one? Yeah, it's an emotional involvement with that person doing your design, as well as a professional one. So, you know, making sure that you get on with that person, that they're reflecting your thoughts about what it is that you want to do and why you want to do it. Yeah, I think that's important. Cost. An architect has been to school for 7 years. An architectural technician has been to school for 4. So that there probably is some cost difference, but not necessarily. If I had to segment between the two, I guess one question I want you to consider is whether you know what you want and you just want somebody to draw it, or whether you want somebody to interpret your brief to give you back something that you hadn't necessarily anticipated. Okay, and I would think that architects, part of that 7-year training for the architects is a very holistic view of the whole of the construction process. So if words like flow mean are important to you, then an architect is more likely to be talking in those sorts of terms, whereas an architectural technologist, to me, would be slightly better at following what they're told to do. Yeah, but there are plenty of examples that fall outside of that bracket, so I don't want to upset anybody, but that's probably what I would think. But yeah, if you're thinking about, I know what I want, I just want somebody to draw it, then make sure that you're not going to the most creative person, because they're not going to be turned on by your project. Yeah. Whereas if your brief is much more, well, I'm looking for something that does this sort of thing, then somebody who can interpret that brief to give you something back. And sorry, just the final thing on this one. Think about the terms of the engagement with your architect or technologist, and what sort of behavior that might then be driving. Yeah, so we don't like percentage fees. Yeah, we like fixed fees. And if the architect or technologist can't give you a fixed fee, is it because your brief isn't clear enough for them to be able to give you that fixed fee? But obviously, if you're working on a percentage fee, then my fear is that those are the sorts of projects where you suddenly get turrets and basements, and yeah, because it's in that designer's interest to make the project more robust. Yeah, so yeah, fixed fees good for any element of design.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. So we're going to move on to the second section now. We did have quite a lot come through for design, so we can come back to some more at the end with time, if we do have any time left over at the end. So the first one for procurement, this one's from Colette, and she said, what building regs sign-off assessments and certificates can you achieve once a shell build is complete? If not all can be If not, all can be obtained until a later stage when internal fittings are at a more mature stage. Is there a deadline by which all building, including internal fit, needs to be completed by?
Okay, so we've got to define what the shell is first. So if that's just watertight, then there's building control will come and do an inspection, but they're not going to do any degree of sign off here. So you can check their notes of that inspection to check that they're happy. Obviously, foundations, walls been done correctly, that there's no remedial action required, but they're not going to issue any degree of certificate at that stage. If you can get the house, the dwelling, habitable without complete, then there possibly is a certificate of lawful habitation that you could go for in advance of the house actually being complete. We've got to think about what that might do for the insurance of the house. So it might be all very well for building control to say, well, this house could be occupied, but probably up to that point, the house is being insured by the builder. So if you move in, yeah, who's then insuring that house? Because if you burn it down in an incomplete house, then and you may find that your insurance company is unhappy to take over the insurance without it being complete. So that's just something to think about there. Then there was a timescale aspect, I think, wasn't it? Building control, building regs have a 3-year time frame as well. Again, that's to start. Once you've started, then you're locked into the building regs that existed at the time that your building regs were issued. So if the regs are being revised during your during the life of your project, you will not get caught with the upgrade in the regs. Yep, you'll have to deliver as per the regs at the time that your permission was granted. Okay, there is a time clock, particularly for approved inspectors. At some point, they'll get fed up with not signing your project off, and will fire it back to the local authority. Okay, and it'll revert to being a local authority project. So do just be aware of that.
Okay, so the next one's from Mark, and he says, I am pursuing a Section Q portal frame conversion and have a permitted development approval. Can I reclaim that as a self-builder, or are only new build projects eligible?
Portal frame conversion, was that? So I would have thought, and I'm not a planning expert, so you're gonna need to go and check this. We've got a couple of VAT advisors that we work with frequently. I'm happy to pass names on in due course. But if it is a conversion, then you should be eligible for reduced rate VAT. Now, what the particular reduction rate is going to be for you might depend on a couple of things, but you're likely to move from a 20% VAT rate to at least a 5% VAT rate, possibly down to 0. So I would have thought that you're going to get a substantial reduction in the VAT. Whether you'll be able to avoid it altogether, not sure. You'll probably need specialist advice on that.
Thank you. So the next one's from James, and he's asked, what would be the clause required in the JCT contract to specify house must, sorry, I'm going to read that again. What would be the clause required in the JCT contract to specify house must meet passive house standards? I'm not actually sure if that has read that well.
So you want to build a passive house, yeah, and you want to ensure that you get a passive house, I think is where we're at, yeah. And how are you going to do that under the JCT contract? Well, there is no specific clause under JCT that says, you know, this is passive house. It's not set up like that, yeah. What you're going to do in the JCT contract is say that this JCT contract is based upon these drawings and this specification, and your requirement for the passive house is laid out in the drawings and in the specification. Okay, so if it's clear from the drawings and the spec that the house is a passive house, and those drawings are clearly identified as contract drawings, yeah, then if the builder doesn't build as per the contract drawings, yeah, then the builder's in trouble. Okay, so yeah, that means that we can specify anything, yeah, as long as it's on the drawings, whether it's passive house, whether it's some other aspect of the performance of a building. We need to make sure that it's clearly identified in specification and on the drawings, and that those drawings are clearly identified within the contract. Okay, and that's how you tie that up.
Okay, so the next one's from Stan, and he's asked, what might it cost to provide a tin hat over a 3-bedroom bungalow to fit a new roof?
Yeah. So tin hats are supposed to have an engineering design attached to them to make sure that an engineer has said, if built like this, it's not going to blow away. Okay. Now, if done like that, you'll probably find that you could be in the region of 15k for that tin hat. We sometimes find that the contractor is putting up a tin hat at a substantially lower cost than that, but they're doing it without reference to an engineered design. Okay, so you're going to have to take a view as to whether you're happy with that or not. Yeah, one way or another, you need to make it absolutely clear that the insurance for the scaffold, everything that happens on site, yeah, and any damage that it causes to you, passers-by, whoever, yeah, neighbouring properties, is not your issue. Yeah, if that forces the price of that tin hat up, sorry, yeah, we do read too many stories of scaffold and bits and pieces blowing down in high winds. So that's something to be aware of. Okay. Can I just come back on the passive house one? Sorry. We set up the passive house contractually in that last question. Yeah. What that doesn't do is necessarily ensure delivery on site. Okay. So what we've done is give you a remedy for arguing with the builder should that passive house standard not be achieved. Is that helpful for you as a homeowner? Not particularly. Yeah. If you go through an 8-month build process, yeah, anticipating a passive house, get to the end, test it, find that it fails, yeah, you've got a contractual right to go back and haggle with the builder, but you still can't move in. So it's hopeless. So think about asking the builder how they're going to demonstrate to themselves and ideally to you how they're on target to deliver that contractual requirement. All right. So I would expect to hear from the builder that they're going to carry out intermediate air testing once they've got the frame up and are watertight, to show to themselves and to you that that structure meets passive house standards. All right. And if they're not going to do that, then that's making me nervous. Obviously, if they don't know what passive house is in the first place, why have you put them on the tender list? Sorry, just.
Thanks, Charlie. Okay, so the next one's from Barbara, and she's asked, should I set up an account with a supplier so that I can reclaim the VAT?
Depends how we're procuring the project. Yeah. If you're using a main contractor on a new build house with 0 rate VAT, then that main contractor is going to wash the VAT. He's going to sort that. Should never charge you VAT. For those elements of the project that you are purchasing direct, we need to have your planning certificate. Your planning permission needs to clearly say that this is a new dwelling. All right, erection of a new dwelling, and it's okay for you to tell your suppliers that this is a new dwelling and therefore 0 rated. And you'll find that most of them shouldn't charge you the VAT in the first place if they're given that information. If let's say your kitchen, yeah, if they're adamant that they are going to charge you the VAT, yeah, then you're going to put that on your VAT return and do a reclaim. If you're thinking of buying all the materials from Jewson's or Travis Perkins or somewhere directly yourself rather than through a builder, yes, then you're going to want to open an account with that builder's merchant. Builders merchants have been very tricky up to very recently. They have said that the application of VAT is too complicated for them, and they tend to just apply VAT and you need to do the reclaim. We're beginning to find that builders merchants are beginning to be more sympathetic and start to apply the right rate of VAT. So you'll need to check with your local builders merchant about what they're going to do. Make sure, obviously, all materials need to be allocatable to you or your site address. So if you're opening up that builders merchant's account, it's going to have your site address, and therefore everything that your builders merchant then says, this is all the stuff that you've had from us, you can then put in your VAT return and do your reclaim on. I think that answers that question.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a few more questions on procurement. This one's from Colette. It says, critical path is a term that Charlie has used on numerous occasions. Please can he explain what this is exactly and what are the critical path tasks?
Okay, so let's take an example. The walls of your house cannot go up until the foundations have gone in. Okay, so getting the foundations in is critical to being able to get the walls up. And there will be one set of events that is always the crucial ones to be working on from start to finish. All right. So getting the foundations in enables you to put your to put your walls up. Yeah. Whereas digging the foundation for the hot tub down the bottom of the garden has no bearing on the house. Yeah. Getting your hot tub installed is going to take 2 weeks. Yeah. But getting the house installed is going to take 8 months. So it's crucial that we're working on the items that determine the overall project timescale. Yeah. And when we plug all the operations into a Gantt chart, that Gantt chart will analyze, we used to have to do it by hand, but now that the computer programs do it automatically, would analyze which items go back to back to be the critical ones that we have to be working on to avoid a delay. So any delay to a critical path item means that end date is being extended, whereas a peripheral item can go on alongside those critical path items, and they won't matter if they happen on Monday or they happen on Wednesday. Yeah. Now, obviously, at some point, those peripheral items may get so far delayed that they themselves become critical. Yeah. The great thing about a construction project is that the critical path items are probably always the same. So it's always going to be the foundations. It's always going to be the walls up. It's always going to be putting the roof on. Getting watertight. I don't care too much about the tiles, but getting watertight. Yeah. After that, it gets a little bit complicated, but we've got to get the pipes and the wires into the walls, and we've got to get the plasterboard on the walls. All right. Just think about those areas of your project that have the most operations in them. So that's going to be your kitchen and your bathrooms. Yeah. Your kitchen's a pain in the backside because it might be that you're installing the units, and then you've got to template a worktop. So not only have you got all the plasterboarding, plastering, painting tasks, you've got to install the kitchen. Yeah. And you can't fit the worktop until the kitchen's installed. Then somebody's got to measure that worktop, go away for 2 weeks, come back, fit the worktop. You can't fit your kitchen tap until that worktop's installed. yeah, and you can't fit your splashback and put your electrics on, yeah, until that kitchen top's installed. So I'd wager that your critical path, unless you've got swimming pools and other bits and pieces, is going to go through your kitchen. So try to get people working on your kitchen all the time. Yeah, first room that the plasterer starts in, kitchen. First room that the painter starts in, kitchen. They'll want to start upstairs and work down. Yeah, if you can, get them to do that kitchen first, because that's the one where most of the tasks occur.
Okay, so the next one's from Mike, and he's asked, how does having a mid-sized co-housing project between 20 and 30 homes impact on planning? So he's actually submitted this question in relation to all three topics. So I don't know if you're sort of able to give a general overview there from Mike.
I'm not sure, Mike, that there's enough information for me to be able to answer that question. Just read it again, Katie.
Okay, so it's how does having a mid-sized co-housing project of between 20 and 30 homes impact on planning, etc.? But he's also submitted it with relation to design and life on site. So
okay.
All three.
So I'm assuming, Mike, that we're saying, look, if this is a co-housing project, is my chance of getting planning improved? One, I'm afraid I don't have enough expertise in planning to be able to answer that. And two, I think it's going to be down very much to local authority views. So yeah, and whether they're giving any land allocation in particular to those sorts of projects, which some of them are. But I think that's I'm afraid that's a question for planning specialist. I'm going to duck that one.
Okay, so I think what we may have to do now is move on to the third section, if that's okay, Charlie, just so we can keep in with time. Had loads of questions for the first section, so I'm aiming to get through a few more of those at the end. So this one is from Ross, relating to life on site. So he's asked, is there any good project management software for self-builders? All the software I can find is intended for professional builders.
Sorry, I'm not going to be any different there. Yeah, the software that we use is a licensed product aimed at a building company, so it's called Buildertrend. Yeah, it makes sense for given the volume of sites that we've got on the go. So appreciate that's not terribly helpful to you. Having said that, there are plenty of free issue Gantt charts. Yeah. And what you're after, I think, is a Gantt chart that's going to give you that logic linking between the tasks to be able to show where that critical path is. So Asana, Instagantt, something like that will be fine. Microsoft Project, if you can get access to Microsoft Project, yeah. Microsoft Project is fantastic. It gets a bit heavy duty, but if you can just keep it down, just doing the Gantt chart side of things, yeah, then that can be great. Something where when you enter the tasks, you're going to have to say whether you can start something before something else finishes or not. Yeah, so you're going to have a think about that. But if you indicate that finish to start or start to start, finish to finish relationship, yeah, then it'll track a critical path for you. Just remember that what you're trying to do here is to create a management tool, not just a pretty picture that gets stuck on the wall. So it's only going to be any good if you're then updating the progress weekly, yeah, to redraw that critical path, yeah, so you can see what modifications you need to make to who you need to call to be able to get the project delivered.
Okay, so this next one is from Tom. It's quite a long one, so I'm going to test you here a bit, Charlie. Apologies. So Tom has written in, there are 6 tests which need to be carried out as part of a project: SAP tests, EPC, air permeability tests, sound insulation test, ventilation test, and water efficiency test. On a conversion project, would all 6 of these tests need to be carried out, and at what stage would they need to be done? That's the main part of the question. And then he's also put, would building control generally facilitate these tests during their part of the process? Or is this the project manager's responsibility away from building control?
Okay, so let's work backwards. Building control will come when called. Yeah, so if you don't call them until the end, yeah, they're going to come at the end and go, well, we haven't inspected any of this. We don't know whether it's any good. And where is all your test data? Yeah, so they're not going to be proactive in providing the information. Yeah, somebody's going to have to call building control to come and do the inspections through the life of the project. Whether that's your project manager, normally we would try to get the building control calling responsibility fixed with the person who's going to get held up if building control don't come and do their inspection. All right, so if you've got a builder on site, that's going to be the builder. I'd expect the builder to be calling building control, and I'd make that builder's final payment contingent on us getting building control sign off. Right, so if we haven't heard that building control are happy, then Mr. Builder, we can't deem that the project is complete. If you're down some form of trades route, then I want the ground worker to be calling building control to get them to come and do the inspection for the foundations. I want the brickie to be calling building control to get them to come and inspect the walls. Yeah, so you work out what those inspections are. The project manager's job is to make sure that building control has been called, yeah, rather than to call them in the first place. Yeah, so I would expect your project manager to be saying to the ground worker, have you had building control out? Were they happy? Now, those tests, the requirement for the tests is going to vary from a project to project. Okay, so some local authorities are more demanding about the performance that they want to see from a project than others. On all projects, you're going to need to have the SAP, the on-design SAP. The site SAP. That's then going to generate the EPC. So you probably don't have to have an EPC test, but the SAP calcs are then going to generate the EPC itself. To be able to get that SAP, you may have to conduct the air test. Again, if you're at a basic building regs house that defaults to building regs, building control may not require you to demonstrate that test. Yeah, but if you're doing any better than basic building regs, then you may need to demonstrate. Let's go back a bit. Sorry, the SAP splits into two parts. You do a SAP at the design stage to say that in theory this house is going to meet building control if it includes all of these materials and is put together like this. So your building control officer, when they do their plan check, says, yes, fine, we've got a SAP calc, in theory it works, great. When we get to the end of the project, your SAP assessor will need to rerun those SAP calcs, and they'll say to you, have you built it in accordance with what you told us you were going to build it with in the first place? Yeah. And if you can say yes, fine. Yeah. The SAP assessor will need some degree of certification to be able to believe you. And one of those may well be the air test, particularly if your project is better than basic building regs. The sound, they're only likely to want demonstrations of the sound if you're a particularly sound important project. So if you're in a block of flats, if you're in a semi, and we've got to demonstrate that there's noise separation between another property, you might have to do a sound test. On most single domestic properties, yeah, there's not actually going to be a test that you're going to have to conduct there. Same will go for the water. if you confirm that you've used the fittings that you anticipated using, then automatically you'll get the level of water usage that you said you would get in the theory stage. So you won't actually then have to go and demonstrate any of the water usages on site. But there might be something about your particular project where actually that water gets to be a more important than a standard clause that necessitates that there might be a demonstration required to building control, but it's probably unlikely.
Thank you, Charlie. Okay, so a couple more questions on life on site. These are quite good ones. So we've got, if the site is very tight, what office, toilet, restroom space do you have to provide?
Well, you still have to provide it. Yeah, so they've got to have somewhere to be able to take a break and relieve themselves. Yeah, it doesn't have to be on site. So if you can do a deal with the Starbucks over the road, that's fine. Yeah, but they've got to be able to go and use it. You know, so it's going to get quite expensive for you, obviously, to go and negotiate the use of somebody else's facilities. But you've got to be able to provide them with some facility. It doesn't have to be very glorious. Yeah. So and it doesn't have to be permanent, by which I mean it could move around the site. Yeah, so it might be that you set up a loo facility in one particular area, and then at some point you need to decant that because actually you then need to get in and do some work in that area. So you're going to have to get creative on that. This is where you see the sort of stacking arrangements on some of the more major construction sites to try to balance to get all of these facilities in and onto site. So sometimes it's feasible that you might have to support your cabins off the ground so that you can get in underneath and put the cabin double stacked both off the ground. Yeah, it's that's going to be up to you to work out how you do that given that site constraint. But you are going to have some facility for the guys to have a break in and to be able to obviously wash and go to the loo.
Okay, so the next question from Anthony is, if you had to pick 5 essential things to put in your site office, what would they be?
Okay, in my office on site, how obvious am I allowed to go? So we're going to need some tables. We're going to need a table. We're going to need some chairs. Yeah. We're going to need some drawings. And even if we've got a computer in here, I would still want a hard copy of drawings. I'd probably have an internet connection. I'd want to know where the milk is going to be stored. Yeah, because we're going to need tea. Now that might not be in the office, so yeah, I might, if I moved that to the to somewhere else, then I'm allowed an extra one in here. But if I haven't got space for a fridge somewhere else, then I'll have to have the fridge in here. Where's your first aid kit going to go? Yeah, because obviously we're going to have a first aid kit and the accident book somewhere. So if I'm allowed to have those somewhere else, fantastic. I've got space for all of these things. Otherwise, the table and chairs I might have to take as a given because I need my accident book and a first aid kit.
Okay, so the next one is from James, and he has said, in your experience, are there any issues to watch out for if you're living on site apart from health and safety?
Yeah, absolutely. So noise, dust, yeah. Construction dust gets everywhere, yeah. And at all stages of the project. So you might think that as you move towards decoration, you're finally getting rid of the dust. Forget it. The painter and decorator rubbing the house down will cause dust for the next 6 months. So you've got to accept that and obviously protect furnishings that aren't are in rooms that are not going to get used, and you've got to realize that you're going to be cleaning up your living area a lot, and construction work is noisy, so it's going to have an impact on you. It's going to be incessant. The other sort of more curvebally one is your degree of involvement, because it's noisy, because it's dusty, you're going to, and because it's next door, you're going to want to go and have a look, or the temptation is to go and have a look at what's going on all the time, and you're in danger of getting caught with having to provide a COVID update every day of the week when there's no update to actually give, if you know what I mean. So just giving the builders and the guys on site some time and space to actually do some work, and you managing your nervous involvement by some degree of distance, so that you're not either frustrated or enraged or whatever by continually getting drawn into, and you'll end up taking over the management, and then feeling like you're taking over the management, which just that way disaster lies.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. So it's pretty much 12 o'clock now, actually. So we've kind of allocated about 50 minutes or so to each of the sections. So what I'm going to do now is I'll just say to everyone listening in, this has been an hour. So if you do have to go to other Zoom meetings, anything like that, you can dip out now if you like. We'll give you that option. This is being recorded, so you will be able to watch back if you don't have time right now. However, if it's okay with you, Charlie, I'm going to read out some of the questions that we didn't have time for earlier, but I think might be quite applicable to everyone listening. So if you're happy to do that, I might just ask a few from earlier.
When we get to a difficult one, my connection will just suddenly drop out.
I'm sure it will. Okay. So this one's from James, and he's asked, does the SIL form have to be submitted with the planning approval application?
Yes, so there are 3 SIL forms, and one of them has to go in with your planning application. So you have to tell the planners that you are a self-builder when you put that planning application in. I think it's 7.1 at that point.
All right, so this next one is from David, and he said, timber frame or SIPs, which is the best when you're on a tight budget?
Well, we tend to think that timber frame is going to be cheaper than the SIPs from a capital cost point of view, because of you're insulating it on site, you're buying a less tech type solution. But there's more on-site operations, so we would think that the quality control on a timber frame is going to be more difficult than on a SIPs, and that the performance of the timber frame from a thermal point of view, air tightness point of view, is going to be harder to get right than the SIPs. So from a running cost point of view, we might then favour the SIPs over the timber frame, but from a capex point of view, probably the timber frame. Unless it's oak, of course.
Okay, thank you. Next one's from Lee, and he's asked, how much value is there involving the builder in the designing the detail in the construction drawings? Did that read okay? Sorry.
So involving the builder, not just in the design details, but in the design, can be an excellent way to procure your project. So if you know the builder you want to use, then getting that builder to come and in effect audit the design as your designer draws it can be great, because that builder will come up with all sorts of ideas about, actually, do you know what, if you were to do it this way, then it would be more efficient. obviously you're heading down some form of negotiation. So usually you think that that's not going to be the most competitive route to procuring the project, but it can be effective cost-wise in that it gives you a value engineered solution. So efficient, yeah, and less risky for the builder, which can have benefits. The design detailing, so the you'll have got planning, you'll have got building regs, but there is a whole load of detailing about how the job's going to stack up that doesn't feature even on those building regs drawings. So you're right that the builder will inevitably be involved in some elements of design, working out how to actually put the thing together anyway. And you part of the evaluation of the builder is you want to know whether your builder is happy to make things happen, or is the sort of builder who will say, I need a drawing for that, I need some more information. Yeah, and it is reasonable for the builder to do that because he's not being paid to take the risk of how it goes together. Yeah, that might live with the designer. So getting somebody else, anticipating that you might need some on-site time from architect engineer to tell the builder how it's going to work, yeah, or you're going to a builder who is happy and experienced enough to be able to interpret some level of drawings.
Thank you. So this next one is from Caroline, and she has said, we have full planning for a rebuild, but have decided to renovate the existing one instead. Can we start the landscaping on the full planning without building regs approval?
Yes, I don't see why not. Now, the landscaping element and building control, it's going to become relevant depending on what structures you're putting into that landscaping. So if you've got retaining walls or electrics, plumbing, things like that, then your building control are going to want to be involved. Yeah, but if it's just scraping and soil manoeuvring, then building control wouldn't need to be involved anyway.
Okay, so we'll just do a few more, I think, so we don't want to go too much over, as I appreciate people probably have other places to be as well. So this next one is from Paul, and he said, we have been told that timber frame is difficult to change once it's up, i.e. if we wanted to change the use of building further down the line.
It is more difficult, yeah. So you've got structural support, obviously, where each of those timbers are, and if you decide you want to make an amendment to that, then you may be cutting out a structural element, yeah, which is then going to need to reasonably involved process to make sure that your house still stands up, yeah. Whereas a brick and block house, that structure is spread throughout, all of the external walls. So cutting an opening into a particular part is less invasive up to a point. Obviously, it depends how big that opening is. Changing the use of the building, well, I guess that's depending what you're wanting to change it to. Yeah, so if you're suddenly changing a domestic dwelling into a gymnasium, and you're going to be kicking footballs against your wall, then having any form of plasterboard wall is going to be at risk from impact damage, as opposed to having a solid plastered wall, where the damage would be less. So you then need to consider what that change of use is going to be. But I think it's reasonable for somebody to be saying timber frame might be slightly more flexible, slightly less flexible. Obviously, if that's an alternative manufacturer, then you've got to take that with some degree of caution.
Okay. Thank you. So the next one's from Paul. This was sent a little bit earlier on in the session, so I'd just like to get around to this one. He says, we are building a home for someone with disabilities which requires ceiling hoists, etc. We have been given mixed advice about how to build brick and block or timber frame. What would be your thoughts?
So actually it's allied to that last one. Yeah. So either system is fine. If you're on a timber frame, then there is slightly less flexibility about how those hoists are going to get supported. Yeah. So if you know where your hoists are going to go, then the timber frame can be designed to take account of that. Yeah. But you've got to have thought about it before you've commissioned your timber frame. Yeah. Whereas if you're on a brick and block house, yeah, then you know that you can transfer the load somehow down to those walls. Yeah. And therefore you could make your decision about where the hoist is going to get supported at a later date. Or if a new hoist comes out in 5 years' time and you want to renovate and update for the new hoist, you're less worried about whether you're still going to be able to transfer that load. So that brick and block house has more flexibility, but there's no reason why the timber frame shouldn't work if properly designed.
Thank you, Charlie. So I think the last question that we will answer today has been sent in by Douglas, and it's about bats. So he says, talk about bats on site, under the eaves, in a building. Where does dealing with them fit in the process? What tips do you have?
Okay, so bats and ecology generally are a significant consideration. There are specific times of year that you can deal with specific elements of ecology. Okay, so the bats, you need to provide them with alternative accommodation. You need to give them an opportunity to move to that accommodation before you can do the demolition. All right, and they will only do that migration at certain specific times of the year, which means outside of those times of the year you cannot do demolition, renovation, take your roof off. All right, so you need to understand those constraints. You need to work with the bat license, with the ecologist to give you the bat license. So there's an additional cost there for getting the ecologist on board, and there's the frustration of just missing your time window to work with. This could be newts, it could be kestrels, it could be any bit of ecology. Yeah, so you need to understand the rules that those fall within and to follow them. If you don't, then you're not conforming with your planning condition. Yeah, and you have voided your planning your planning permission. All right, so at some point you might be held responsible for building something without planning. Okay, obviously there are then fines that would follow from there, so it's significant. I would encourage you to think that bats are cute, they eat your bugs, they're going to make your roses look better, and they're endangered, and if you can convince yourself that it's a positive to be having bats rather than as an imposition, then it makes the costs that you're going to be bearing slightly more bearable.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Charlie. They're brilliant answers. I hope you all found that really helpful to listen to. Apologies we couldn't get through every single question. We did quite well. We got through quite a lot of them. We have been slightly inundated with questions. I'm going to make a note of these just so that I have a record of all the ones that we didn't have time to answer today. So Charlie and Harvey, if you're lurking in the background there as well, please don't close the session down because I will make a note of these and I'll see what we can do as we have numerous technical experts at the centre. So we may be able to get a couple of answers out for those we didn't have time for today. I'll see what I can do. So thank you very much again, Charlie, and thanks for everyone who's listened to today. That's the final session of the project management course. So I hope over the last month that you found all of these really helpful. So thanks for bearing with us. We've had a couple of technical glitches, I think, along the way, but I think we've done quite well considering it's our first time using Zoom. Really happy with it, great attendance. So thank you very much everyone for joining us. I'd just like to say a quick reminder before you all head off, that the NSBRC are going to be reopening the doors on Wednesday the 17th of June, so you can come and visit us. So that's when we're going to be open to the public, but you will need to book on our website in order to arrange an appointment, because obviously we're still doing social distancing. It's going to be a little bit different. So you must let us know if you'd like to come, and then we can confirm that with you. So yeah, that can all be done on our website. And I've mentioned, I think in the previous sessions, that we are going to be running a eco workshop soon. So that'll be the week after that we open. So that's on Saturday, the 27th of June. And again, you can book for that on our website. It's completely free. And just a quick note to say that please keep an eye out from myself and Harvey, because we're going to be sending out feedback forms so you can let us know how we've done. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, but if there's anything you think we could do for next time, that would be interesting to know about. So yeah, that's about all from me. The only thing I'll say as well is I did send out the PDF files for the course presentation. So Charlie's presentation and his notes should be with you. If you have any trouble finding this email, just let me know and I can get it resent out. So that's all from me. So thanks very much again for joining. Hope you've enjoyed it. We look forward to seeing you at the centre, and I'm just going to hand over to Charlie again if you'd like to say any concluding remarks.
No, thanks guys. Yeah, it's great to have all those questions. It's great to still have you with us, yeah, to know that you're engaged that far, and to have all of those questions, you know, shows that you've been listening, which is great. Thank you very much indeed. Good luck.
Fantastic. Yeah, good luck everyone with your project. See you soon.
Cheers.